We don't have the pastor system because it's in the Bible, because it's not in the Bible. In fact, what we have in the Bible is not a one-person system with other people kind of underpinning all of that. We see a plurality of elders that are appointed through specific qualifications that are actually shepherds who have a teaching and shepherding function within the church body. That's what we see in the pastorals, Timothy and Titus. We see it in the book of Acts. They are appointed by apostles. They are appointed by the evangelist. They are appointed through fasting and prayer. This is the biblical model. It seems as if they were either over congregations and or over cities of house churches rather than just the founding pastor, the senior pastor. All that language is just not even in the Bible. And I'm not saying it's automatically sinful. I'm just saying it's not biblical. I think really, in effect, it comes because it's successful in creating a system that is able to produce a certain metric, a certain set of numbers that appeals to people, that just really shows a high degree of success. I used to be down on it solely just because it was just not in the Bible. We really want a desired biblical model of church leadership like we find in the pastorals in the book of Acts. I think there's actually some deeper seated issues with this, and the first is the American culture and the phenomenon of the megachurch and the large church with a big church pastor who can very easily become a narcissist, or is a narcissist who seeks out that position. And I'm not saying that's most senior pastors or founding pastors at all, but it does happen. I have a whole video about that that's just had lots and lots of views, tens of thousands of views. I'm going to put that up on the screen for you to watch if you haven't seen that yet. What I'm about to say is just a broad negative generalization. I really don't like talking like that, so I want you to understand that I'm not saying this applies to everybody. But I do think that the issues that I once had about the senior pastor situation in the American church was a biblical issue, but I think it's actually a spiritual issue. It's really both. It's not really one or the other. And it's a spiritual issue because it can appeal to certain aspects of our American culture and carnality of looking for certain growth metrics that really are not growth metrics that we find in the Bible. It doesn't necessarily lead to spiritual maturity. It doesn't really necessarily lead to discipleship. It doesn't necessarily lead to much other than perpetuating a certain brand or a way of doing church or a certain specific denomination, kind of building our own personal kingdoms. And that's not everybody. There's some amazing servants who serve in that senior pastor, head pastor, founding pastor role. Don't deny it. I've seen some amazing, exceptional examples of where they're just like knocking it out of the park, extraordinarily spiritually minded, fasting and prayer. Like that does happen. But I think we have to really take care to make sure that we're not propping up one person and one person's vision, but that we are in community seeking out spiritual discernment. Because what ends up happening with this whole senior pastor mentality is there then creates a space between the pastor, which is actually a shepherd. The word pastor is a shepherd. You're pastoral. You're out in the field with the sheep. And shepherds are with sheep. So it creates a separation between the leadership and the laity and the people. And there shouldn't even be a laity leadership distinction in our terminology. The priesthood of all believers from 1 Peter chapter 2 is incredibly important, that we don't create these degrees of separation within our church governance structures that set one person apart from the rest. That was the priesthood in the Old Testament. You had the high priest who was supposed to do that. But the veil was torn when Jesus was crucified. The separation of who could go where and who was special and who wasn't and all that sort of stuff was undone when Jesus was crucified, resurrected, and the church began in Acts 2 by the Holy Spirit indwelling all the people in the same way, with the same quality, producing the same kind of fruit. So we have to be really careful when we begin creating man-made distinctions and divisions with titles that don't really reflect the biblical definition of things, the biblical definition of a pastor or an elder. Sometimes I'll use that term pastor, like even in my videos or titles, I'll use that word pastor for a preacher, for the leader of the church, in the sense that that's a well-recognized term, but it's not really the biblical usage of that term. And I'm not one just to say, well, that's sinful and wrong. You're wrong to say that. You're wrong to take that title necessarily. But I just think we need to check our motives and check our hearts and check our structures and systems to make sure that we are not appealing to a carnal, fleshly mindset that is deeply imbibed in American cultural Christianity, that likes to see success, that likes to see the numbers, And then I look at the system in which I grew up, which was a plurality of volunteer elders, and I'm saying, well, man, the pastor thing kind of looks pretty good because they're growing, they've got vision and direction, and they're executing like it's a good business model. And over here, it's like we're not really growing. We're struggling with this volunteer base of untrained, uneducated volunteer elders who are over the trained, educated, experienced preacher. Like that whole system has tremendously bothered me as well, not because it lacks some biblical support, but because it too, just like the pastor thing, can come from our own kind of Americanized Christianized culture, where we aren't really being also very spiritually minded, in tune with the Holy Spirit, led by the Spirit, surrendered and submitted. Just like the senior pastor can rise above and not be surrendered and submitted, we can also have systems in place of volunteers and pluralities, etc., that have all the right biblical qualifications and still suffer from the exact same problem of the invasion of culture, the lack of spirituality, the lack of discernment, the lack of fasting and prayer. Elders in the Acts were pointed through fasting and prayer. Never seen it in my entire life. This is a subject that's near and dear to me, and I don't think it's like we have to pick one or the other. We have to pick the senior pastor system, or we have to pick the plurality of elder system. What I think we have to look at is we have to look at the scriptures and go back to it and surrender and submit ourselves to what's there. And if we will do that, what we're going to find when we do that is a beautiful system where the leaders are surrendered to the chief shepherd, Peter calls him. I think that's in 1 Peter 5. And the overseer of our souls is the one who oversees our elders, and they understand that they live under his authority. I once heard an elder use the term executive privilege for the fact that they thought they could just do whatever it is that they wanted to do anytime they wanted to do it without consulting anybody, without even necessarily even praying about it. That's really troubling. And it's the exact same problem that we are railing against and fighting against in the senior pastor system is happening in our own ranks. Same kind of fleshliness, the same kind of carnality, the same kind of cultural influences have invaded. And so we need to go back to the scriptures, and we need spiritually minded shepherds, not just business minded shepherds, because it's the same mentality that we're fighting against. So let's surrender to the Spirit, look around and see who is surrendered to the Spirit a lot, the most, and then who can lead us in that kind of surrender and submission, to be discerning, to be prayerful, and through fasting and prayer to listen for the voice of God and to lead the church in that direction, to shepherd the people along, which means to care for them, to tend to them, to be teaching shepherds or pastors or elders, whatever the word is that you want to use, that is part of teaching the congregation. I have not seen that happen an awful lot in my tenure of 20 plus years in ministry. A lot of elders want to be decision makers, not teachers, and that's not at all what we find in the scriptures. I'm going to put two videos up on the screen that I hope you'll pay attention to. One is on elder selection, and one is on the thing that you've never seen happen when it comes to selecting elders. We have some real issues with that. I'm going to put some more links in the description for you to follow up with some other videos on biblical eldership that I hope you'll take a minute to watch. So if you haven't subscribed, we're over 8,000. It's crazy. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. Like it, share it with a friend. But most importantly, just watch another video. We'll see you again soon.